Hello, welcome to Legal Insights, our YouTube series where we talk a little bit more about legal aspects related to mobility. Today's topic is what is the legal mobility budget? Well, legal mobility budget is actually a part of flexible mobility. And flexible mobility is a good solution for you as employee. And why is flexible mobility and thus also the legal mobility budget a good option? Well, first of all, the freedom of choice. With flexible mobility, you can choose how you are going to manage your mobility. I think that's very important. Also, the second benefit is a fiscal advantage. So, if you choose for flexible mobility, if you choose for the legal mobility budget, it's fiscally attractive. We will discuss that later in this video. And thirdly, it's more satisfying. If you can choose how you're going to manage your mobility, you're going to choose something that you like and it's going to satisfy you more. So flexible mobility and more specifically the legal mobility budget is, I think, a good option to choose for you as employee. But what is now actually the legal mobility budget? The legal mobility budget is something that you can choose as employee if you have a company car or if you have the right to a company car. Then you can go to your employer and say, okay, I want to exchange that right, or I want to exchange my company car for a budget. And with that budget, with that mobility budget, you can actually buy different kinds of mobility options. Important for the employer is that it's cost neutral, but that also means that if it's cost neutral for the employer, that the benefit for you as employee is the same. So if you choose a company car or if you choose a mobility budget, the benefit will be the same. So it won't be a disadvantage for you to choose the mobility budget. And why is that? Well, that is because the mobility budget is equal to the total cost of ownership of a company car. And what is that? Well, the total cost of ownership is actually a sum of all costs that your company car has. So it's related to gas, it's related to the lease or the purchase, it's related to the insurance, repairs, all fiscal aspects. So all those costs are calculated and are switched to a budget. So in this example, you have a company car with a TCO of 750 per month. Well, you will get a mobility budget, a yearly mobility budget of 9,000 euros. So the cost is the same, so the benefit is also the same for you. But what can I choose? What can I spend in the mobility budget? Well, we have two pillars. We have the first pillar is mobility and housing costs. Within that pillar, you can choose to purchase or lease or hire a bike, a step, but also buy public transport within the European economical region. That's related to tickets, but also subscriptions. Subscriptions you can also buy for resident family members. You can choose for shared mobility and taxis. You can also have a rental car for a maximum of 30 days. And an interesting option is also the rent or capital and interest on your mortgage. So you can actually use your mobility budget for your housing costs. But this, if you agree with, or if you have one of the following options. So if you live with 10 kilometers of your most common workplace, or if you work more than 50% of the time from home. So one of those two conditions needs to be followed for you as employee. Otherwise, you cannot pay your housing cost with your mobility budget. So be aware of that. That one of those options is necessary for you then for the housing costs. But you can always use your mobility budget for everything related to mobility. But also check the mobility policy. It could be that the employer of your company says that some aspects of mobility are not allowed. So this is an overview of everything what is allowed, but always check your policy if there are restrictions. But most of the time, this is not the case. The mobility budget that you don't use, so the money that you don't use, will actually be pillar 3, a cash out. So at the end of the year, the mobility budget will be given in cash, but that's taxed. There is a social employee contribution of 38.07%. So be aware of that. The contribution will build up social rights for you. So it's actually calculated within your pension, but you won't have the full cash out budget that you have left over at the end of December. So are the options. Important is the flexibility in this part. So within Pillar 2, you can choose to buy a bike, to use a rental car. So you can really make your own mobility plan, your own. You can choose how you're going to use your mobility budget. And how is it now? Well, taxed. We already said Pillar 3 has the contribution of 38.07%. So we already covered that. But with Pillar 2, and that's interesting, there are no taxes and social security contributions. So in this case, net is actually a gross. So you won't pay anything else with the except of the purchase price and the VAT. So that's really fiscally attractive. Otherwise, you always pay taxes or and social contributions. Well, in the mobility budget within Pillar 2, this is not the case. So also for your housing costs, if you're allowed to get your housing costs paid with the mobility budget, you won't pay any taxes or contributions on that. So that's really cool with the mobility budget. Well, if you're interested, how can you start? First, ask yourself some questions. So, always important: am I entitled to a company car? And most of the time, also, if you have at the moment a company car with a leasing contract, most employers ask to switch to the mobility budget if your leasing contract is over. Otherwise, they need to have the car in a fleet and a stock, so they don't want that. So always check the policy if there is something like that. Then, if you can start with the mobility budget, you need to write a written request that can be by email and send that to the employer or to the HR manager. They will respond and they give you the size of your mobility budget, so it's based on the TCO, and then you decide, okay, that's fine for me, I will start with the mobility budget, and you will sign an annex to your employment contract stating all conditions and your budget. So pretty easy to start, but this is the way to start. So that's in a quick overview what the mobility budget is. I'm also quickly going to give you some frequently asked questions, questions that are most common. If there are still other questions, you can always contact us through our platform or through the app. But let's go through over some frequently asked questions. So within the soft mobility and housing cost, what is actually understood by soft mobility? Because I spoke about purchase and rent and lease, but actually also the maintenance, the parking, and also equipment to protect the driver and your passengers, and equipment to increase your visibility are allowed within Pillar 2. This for bicycles, mopeds, also e-steps, motorcycles. So it's broader than just the purchase of those vehicles. It's also about an electrical motorbike or electrical 3 or 4-wheelers. Can I pay for my family's mobility? So yes, you can. For the public transport subscriptions, it's limited to family members living under the same roof. And actually, for all other purchases, you can also purchase them for non-family members or other family members. So there's no limitations for the other purchases. Can I pay parking costs with the mobility budget? Well, normally not. There is an exception in this case, a parking space related to public transport. So if you use public transport, you can actually pay your mobility budget for that parking space. So it needs to be linked with a commute with public transport. Can I use my mobility budget abroad? So yes, indeed, you can use it abroad, but always also here check the employer's policy. Maybe they limit it to within Belgium or within Europe. And also don't forget that the public transport tickets are limited to the European Economical Area. So that's a limitation for the public transport. Can I rent a diesel car with my mobility budget to go on holiday? So yes, you can rent a car. That doesn't need to be an electrical one. You can use also a diesel, a petrol one, but this up to 30 days per calendar year. When am I allowed to use my mobility budget for housing costs? Well, we already covered it. So it's if you live within 10 kilometers of your common workplace, or if you work 50% or more from home. So one of those two, then you can use your mobility budget for the housing costs. Are there limitations? No, there are no limitations, but you cannot use it for moving expenses or water and electricity charges if they are not included in your rent contract. And also, Don't pay your rent or your loan twice with two different mobility budgets. That's illegal. You can only use it once, of course. You have only one cost, one rent or one loan, so you cannot pay it twice if you have a partner. So be aware, if you do that, that's illegal. So you cannot do that. Then within the cash out, when will I receive it? So it's always at the end of the year because it's a yearly budget, and you will get that in January with that payslip. So the January, the month after the year has ended. Can the money in Pillar 3 be transferred to next year? No, it's a yearly budget, so no money will be transferred. And the tax on Pillar 3, or actually social contribution on Pillar 3, builds social security benefits, like we said. It builds up pension rights, but also the unemployment allowance, but it doesn't help you or doesn't give you the right for legal holidays, but it builds up your social rights. So that's also interesting. And finally, at the end, can I receive my entire mobility budget as a cash out budget if I choose not to take anything within Pillar 2, or not to take a higher rental car within Pillar 2, or a bike? So then, yes, indeed, if you don't use anything within Pillar 2, then you have your budget at the end of the year fully paid out as a cash, but taking into account the contribution of 38.07%. So was the legal mobility budget. I hope it's clear now for you. And thank you for listening, and we will hear each other maybe later.